So, I think we're recording. Yep. All right, well, welcome. This is course 2. I call this Pulling the Poison Out, the inner and outer work of undoing racism. So just a reminder to you guys that you want to be watching the 13th documentary if you haven't already. So we'll be discussing that tomorrow night in our class 3. I think you are both familiar with our agreements that we went over in class 1. So cool. So we'll just kind of skip ahead. And if you have any questions or comments about those agreements or any of the other content that we've encountered so far in the class, would love you to bring that up. In addition to the questions for our go around, just tell me where you live, what is your job or profession, and then any thoughts that you have about the class. So Ladane, would you like to start us off?
Sure. I am Ladane McLeese-Pulaski. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am the executive director of the Baptist Peace Fellowship of North America.
And can you say that in Spanish now? Because you're doing it in Spanish.
Paz, which is actually not a direct translation, but it's what our it's Baptist for Peace. It's what our friends, what our partners, our Spanish-speaking partners say they actually call us. So, and as kind of like relevant to this class, kind of every word in Baptist Peace Fellowship of North America is politically fraught. So we just decided to go with something different. And gosh, I have lots and lots of thoughts and questions about the class. I'm having a hard time focusing in on one thing. So,
okay, great.
I can do that.
Yeah, we'll chime in at any time. Thank you. Okay, Arliss. Tell us a little bit more about you. You're calling from Charlotte as well. And tell us a little bit about your work or profession and any thoughts on the agreements or any content we've encountered so far.
I didn't catch who you were.
Okay, Arliss, we're having technical difficulties with you. Can you say that again?
Are you speaking to me? This is Arliss.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your work or ministry or context and any thoughts or questions about the course content so far.
Well, I'm a retired computer system engineer. Been interested in progressive issues in recent years. I don't know what else to say.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, well, let us move along. I want to start us off this evening with something called the Doctrine of Discovery, with a video from Mark Charles, who's just an amazing Native American teacher and speaker who teaches about something called the Doctrine of Discovery. Doctrine of Discovery is something it's a conversation that's very much alive in the church, and I would be remiss in doing racial awareness work with y'all in a faith context if I didn't give you some Doctrine of Discovery. So what we're actually going to do now is listen to about 7 minutes of Mark Charles speaking on the issue. So just Yell if you can't hear the video. The video should come through. I'm actually gonna stop the share the screen again. What is the doctrine of discovery? I'm gonna share the computer sound and hopefully you guys will be able to hear it. Just give me a nod if you're able to hear it. Okay, pushing play. And it's actually silent in the beginning. I'm going to read this first part. The Doctrine of Discovery is a series of papal bulls written between 1452 and 1493. It was essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, whatever lands you find, not ruled by Christian rulers, those people are less than human, and the land is yours for the taking. The real challenge with the Doctrine of Discovery is the ways it has influenced the very foundations of our nation.
Invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens and pagans whatsoever. Reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and convert them to his and their use and profit. Anyone know what I'm reading here? These are the words of Pope Nicholas V in a papal bull, or an official edict of the Catholic Church in 1452. This papal bull, followed by many others from 1452 to 1493, collectively became known as what's called the Doctrine of Discovery. The Doctrine of Discovery is this series of papal bulls that is the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by Christian rulers, those people are less than human, and the land's yours for the taking. It was this doctrine of discovery that allowed European nations to colonize Africa and enslave the African people. It was also this doctrine of discovery that let Columbus, who was lost at sea, land on a continent inhabited by millions and claim to have discovered it, because there were no people here. The notion of discovery is a racist colonial concept that assumes the dehumanization of people of color. If you don't believe me, I welcome you to put your car keys and your smartphones out in front of you, and I will come by and discover them. Discovery requires the dehumanization of the people who are already there. Otherwise, I would be stealing them. The doctrine of discovery is a systemically racist doctrine. In 1763, King George drew a line down the Appalachian Mountains. And he said to the colonies that they no longer had the right of discovery of all lands west of Appalachia. This upset the colonists, and so they wrote a letter of protest. In their letter, they accused the king of raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. They went on in this letter to write that he has excited the domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages. They signed this letter July 4th, 1776. 30 lines below the statement, all men are created equal, the Declaration of Independence refers to natives as merciless Indian savages. The only reason they said all men is because they had a very narrow definition of who was and who was not human. There it is, right here. Merciless Indian savages. The Declaration of Independence, the systemically racist document. A few years later, the colonists wrote down the words, "We the people of the United States," in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. However, just a few lines later, Article 1, Section 2, they never mention women, they exclude natives, and they count Africans as 3/5 of a person. Clearly, we the people does not mean everybody. We the people means white landowning males. Now maybe you're thinking, but wait, we corrected that. Yeah, and then about 90 years later, we passed the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment extended the right of citizenship to any person born under the jurisdiction of the government in this continent. However, that did not give women the right to vote. That didn't come until 1910 with women's suffrage. It did not include natives because we weren't seen as allegiant to the government, and we didn't come into the nation until 1924. It did extend the right of citizenship to former slaves. But we often forget that it was the 14th Amendment in 1970 that was part of Roe versus Wade that was now used to conclude that unborn babies are not human, and therefore they can be aborted. What this demonstrates is that the heart of our Constitution is not a value for life, but a practice of dehumanization and a value for exploitation and profit. Therefore, the Constitution of the United States is a systemically racist document that assumes the dominant has the right to decide who is and who is not human. In 1823, two men of European descent were in litigation over a piece of land. One bought the land from the government, and the other bought the land from a native tribe. They wanted to know who owned it. In deciding the case, the court had to decide the principle upon which land titles were based. And they decided that the principle was that discovery gave title to the government by whose subject or by whose authority was made against all other European governments, which title might be consummated by possession. The court essentially went on to say that based on the doctrine of discovery, natives only had the right of occupancy to land, while Europeans had the right of discovery to the land, and therefore the true title to it. This created a Supreme Court legal precedent for land titles, the reason you can buy and sell property in the United States, that was referenced by the court as recently as 2005. The United States Supreme Court is a systemically racist court with legal precedent based on the dehumanization of people of color.
Where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. Where community is to be formed, common memory must be created. That's from George Erasmus from the Dene Nation. So, were you all able to hear that okay? I've got you unmuted. Okay, were you all able to hear that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So tell me, what are your thoughts on this idea that the Supreme Court is inherently racist? That's quite a statement. Is there anything surprising to you about this, or is this, or had you heard that before? Or did you have that sense?
Well, I first heard about the doctrine of discovery from Brian McLaren about a year and a half ago. And so I'm somewhat familiar with the thing, and it continues to have its effect, as they suggest.
Yeah. What about you, Ladaine? I assume that you've encountered this material before.
Yes, I have. It was new to me that his comment about Roe v. Wade, and then how recently the court has cited it. He mentions that in his talk of, but you're probably going to say, but we fixed all that, which I think is sort of the standard answer. So it is sort of shocking to hear 2005. That's not so long ago.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, we'll be continuing to look at how racism has been able to reinvent itself throughout the ages, particularly with watching the documentary The 13th. So we'll continue to reflect on contemporary examples of how white supremacy continues to operate from this legacy that's just lasted, centuries. It's just amazing. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to jump down from point 4 to 5. I want to do 5 first, and then do 4. Because I want to look at this piece on white fragility together. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. Have you all seen this or been able to read this before? It's transforming white fragility into courageous imperfection.
Yes, I read it. You said that one out
Yes,
loud.
I read it.
Okay, great. Well, of course, this is from Krista Tippett's On Being blog. And, this opens here with a picture of Mike Brown's body in the coffin. There's no joke. This article is not playing when it just starts with that image. Courtney is talking about hearing the term white fragility for the first time. They say a friend uttered it in reference to so many white people respond when challenged about racism. It was one of those moments when you hear language that wraps around something you've experienced or witnessed but found impossible to describe. And they go on to define white fragility is at its essence gut level pushback. It's like the fight or flight response of white people who want to believe that they and the world by extension are less racially divisive than they really are. It's like when you feel like the wind has been knocked out of you when a person of color points out something you've said seems rooted in a privileged experience of the world. And it's why you desperately want to defend why a well-intentioned institution that you're a part of isn't really racist. Now, for me, I have definitely had this experience and was really grateful to have language around this experience. It's very visceral. It's very physically rooted in the body. I love how they define it as gut level pushback because that's really where I feel it is in my gut. Also, this language of the wind being knocked out of you. And most often I've experienced white fragility when someone's telling me how I am doing it wrong and how whatever it is that I'm sharing or talking about seems rooted in kind of my privileged experience of the world or white supremacy within me. And most often how it comes up in me is this desire to want to explain myself, right? Mm-hmm. To be able to be like, oh yeah, no, I get that. And I get power and, dynamics and all that. But, for me, it's blah, 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 blah. Right. And I've been given a lot of grace in situations where I've just insisted on kind of explaining myself to the point where I've been able to kind of observe how that doesn't really get me anywhere by explaining. And, really what has become a practice for me is to actually stop talking when I feel this and just listen and try to be really present and listen to what the person is saying to me. And it often means setting aside ego and not explaining myself and not kind of, trying to convince the other person of my intentions. Because, let's say I step on your foot, Ladine, whether I meant to step on your foot or not, doesn't really matter, does it?
Mm-hmm. No, it'll still hurt.
It still hurts, right? I stepped on your foot. And so, do I explain? Oh, I'm so sorry. I just lost my footing and I just, no, I'm not going to explain myself. Oh my gosh, are you okay? I'm so sorry. What can I do to help? Can I get you some ice? I'm so sorry, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how we talk about identifying white fragility and then being able to respond to white fragility with just being present and deeply listening and kind of setting aside the need to kind of describe our experience or justify or explain that. And then I just wanted to point out something really great that they say here at the end of this article. If it feels difficult, and it does to me, they say, you're probably on the right track. Dismantling centuries of dehumanizing institutions and practices, both in the world and within ourselves, can't be a simple process. The good news is that transforming your fragility into courageous imperfection is the beginning of a lot more joy. It's the beginning of a lot more connection, and it's the beginning of the end of racism. And I feel very inspired every time I read that, because it's so true. This work isn't easy. And so if it feels difficult or if it feels uncomfortable, that's a good sense that you're in the work, that you're doing the work, you know? So we end up redefining our relationship to discomfort a little bit in a way that hopefully deepens our investment in our willingness to stay in spaces that feel uncomfortable. So we're going to talk a little bit about comfort. One way that we feel comfortable is to feel safe. So I wanted to share a little story, actually from a recent experience that I had at the Charlotte uprising. You guys, LaDane, you were there, I'm sure. Arliss, did you hear about the Charlotte uprising that was in response to a Black man being shot by cops?
I heard about it. I did not participate.
Okay, cool. Well, and LaDane, I don't know if you were there or not. I just assumed you would be.
I was there for 4 nights, I think.
Yeah, clearly we know each other. Yeah, so basically my fiance is an associate pastor of a church there. And we were connected with some of the people who were doing some of the early organizing for Charlotte Uprising and putting out the call for people to come and to protest. And so his church just happens to be like right across the street from where the organizing meeting is happening at the Greenpeace office. And so we offered up the church, and his senior pastor and other associate pastor were out of town. I think he called them and they said it was fine. And so I handed over the keys. Steve had run off to a meeting with the Clergy Coalition, and I handed off the keys to the church to a representative of Black Lives Matter, Charlotte, and said, okay, we're in your service. You're in charge. What can we do? And got my marching orders and went to work. And LaDane, you saw the church become, right? You were there. You saw the church become like this mobilization site for a mass protest, which to me, honestly, it's like a lifelong dream to see a church become that kind of space, where there was triage units in the basement. There were piles and piles of bottled water. There was supplies coming in all hours of the night. There were people sleeping all over the sanctuary at night. There were trainings going on in the sanctuary during the day. Right. And we had, just amazing clergy activists like Reverend Siku and Tracy Blackman flying in from out of town, having meetings with Black clergy in this church. Just this incredible, 5 or 6 days of organizing and kind of having a mobilization space and a base, like a home base for the mobilization to come back to, a safer space to come back to. After being out there protesting. And one morning there was this Black woman in getting some coffee, and she and I started visiting, and she told me that she was a Fox News reporter. And I was like, oh, so you're doing a story, and she's like, yeah, it's actually my first day at work, and I hope I do a good job. And we were just chatting. She was very sweet. Loved talking with her, and had taken her through the building. And I got a phone call from Black Lives Matter, who said, we just heard that there's a reporter in the building. I said, yeah, she's putting together a really nice story. And they're like, you have to delete the photos off of her phone. You have to kick her out of the building. She can't be there. She has to leave. And I was like, okay, that sounds like really inhospitable to me, but like, I'll do what you said. And they're like, do it. And they were mad. They were like super mad. I was like, oh God. So I talked to her and I said, I'm really sorry. This is what I'm hearing. And she was like, oh, I kind of get it. I'm a Black woman. I get it. It's okay. And she deleted the photos off her phone and she stopped the story, didn't submit the story, even though it was her first day of work, right? And she was trying to get a good story. And she didn't publish any pictures of the exterior of the building or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And afterwards, I had a conversation with one of them where they said, that wasn't safe to let her in, to let the media see where the church is, to let there are white supremacists all over the South who would come and bomb that church because Black Lives Matter is basing mass protests out of there. We're not safe. The police could come and surround that building. So what you did was a huge breach of our trust and our safety, and I was really blown away because I didn't feel I had a different level of perception of safety than they did. And I realized that perception of safety that I have is from being a white woman who has, light skin and class privilege and gender privilege, where the world is fairly constructed for my comfort and for my sense of safety. And for the safety of other privileged people and people, white people and people with class privilege. And so it was a really strong illustration for me, kind of the different level of safety that we have based on our social location, who we are in the world and who we are biologically. So I wanted to share with you all as kind of a allegorical piece about how we have different levels of safety, and it's an awareness that we need to know. And then surfing the edge of our comfort zone. If we can just go, since we are used to being relatively safe, and there's always exceptions to the rule, but on the whole, people of privilege have have less time feeling uncomfortable because the world is constructed kind of in our image, right? And so we have to practice being uncomfortable. And so one way to think about that is to just go to our place of comfort and then take one step beyond that. And spend time just breathing in that space that's just outside your comfort zone. And you go just outside your comfort zone so you can crawl back in if you have to. You're just one step out. And then we can also look at that. We can do a surf analogy. The surf zone. You want to surf that. You want to be experimental, be playful, and kind of surf that zone that's just right outside of your comfort level. So surf the surf zone of your comfort level. So I want to go through some pitfalls, common pitfalls, microaggressions, and triggers that people of color communities have been communicating to white people in multiracial justice movements for decades. And it's helpful to have some knowledge around these because then we can, we can avoid some of these pitfalls, and we can avoid doing more harm by creating a trigger or instigating a trigger for a person of color. So one of those is actually the title of a book, But I Don't See You as Asian. And that is a book by Bruce Rayce Chow. LaDaine, have you read that one or seen that one?
I haven't.
He actually developed it based off a workshop that he did at Wild Goose West, which was basically just a bunch of slides, and each slide was something a white person has said to him that sucked. And one of those was, but I don't see you as Asian. And he's like, so this is a Filipino American man, right? Incredible guy. He was like the speaker of the Presbyterian body when they made the language that allowed the denomination to then ordain queer people. He was a part of that effort, and he's just this incredible human being. And he says, when you don't see me as Asian, you don't see me for who I am. And it's similar to that old adage of I don't see color. Well, let's not do that. Let's not homogenize the world. So there's no difference. Let's actually celebrate our differences, lift up our differences, and strive really hard to connect across difference, So that's a really great resource. I should put his name on that syllabus for you. His name is Bruce Reyes Chow, and it's a little book, and it's just full of pitfalls. Really, really great. Another trigger pitfall is this burden of people of color to teach white people about racism, particularly when things about race end up in the media. I hear from people of color that they get a deluge of white people who they barely know on Facebook, asking them for their opinion on that shooting, or whatnot. And that those moments are moments that are triggering anyway, to see someone who looks like you go down in a state sanctioned violence, like a police shooting. And that it's okay for white people to teach white people about racism. It's okay for white people to talk to each other about that. And that's actually sharing the burden of undoing racism by learning about it, because as white folks, we have the opportunity to opt out of the conversation. Racism doesn't necessarily affect us if we are living in a white context. And so really shouldering that burden. I want to just briefly define microaggressions. Microaggressions are little bits of white supremacy that are woven into our thoughts and our habits and our behaviors. And the reason that that's there is, my mentor, Alexia Salvatierra, she says that racism is in the air. And so we've all breathed it in, right? So it's in all of our bodies, and that we have to do the dialysis work of pulling the poison out. And microaggressions are bits of that poison that are attached to our just automatic behaviors. And it really takes some level of inner observation to be able to root out those microaggressions and find them. I'll give you an example from my life. I was with a friend of color. We were shopping for a trip out of the country. We were traveling together. And I was like, I need one of those money bags that like goes under your clothes. It's like nude colored. And she looked at me and she's like, you mean tan, like your skin? And I was like, yes, that is not nude. It is tan. You're right. And that was a bit of the poison, right? That was coming out. It's this assumption that whiteness is the default for anything good. And so allowing our self-awareness to identify those microaggressions and then correct them. And I think sharing about them is really helpful. It's really like I just shared that story with you. If I tuck that away and shamefully beat myself up for that microaggression, that wouldn't help anyone. It wouldn't help me. It wouldn't help me correct it with my friend. So bring those out into the open and put light on them so they can be transformed into awareness and a new choice. When we have an awareness of a choice that we can be made, and we can choose to do better. So next thing I want to share with you is this thing called, I'm going to share my screen again. Have you guys kind of been in on the conversation around equity versus equality?
Yes.
Awesome. You may have seen this classic.
I reviewed it fairly carefully.
Okay, great. So this is our typical view: equality versus equity. Equality, no matter what the kid size is, they have the same box, exact same box. Equity, the smaller kids got a couple boxes and such, right? Well, this was a whole critique on that kind of simplistic view of equity versus equality. Now, in this next set of boxes what do we see? We've got 3 kids, we've got boxes, we've got a fence. Well, what's the difference? Can you, from above, the boxes above, can you see the difference? Let's look at the one above.
Yeah, I mean, so I read the article, and she or he, I'm not sure, talks about that the fence isn't the same size.
Right. So if the fence represents structural oppression, the fence varies, right? And then if you also see the ground varies, do you see how the ground kind of goes down? So the ground is going down where the fence gets higher.
Right.
Even. So we're not talking about sameness for everyone, right? We're deeply invested in context. We've got the context of what is the structural oppression, what is the root place, the ground from where this person is coming from. And what I love about the next one is this is the justice view. The kids are tearing down the fence, right? And then
actually,
go ahead.
Since there's only a couple of us, actually seeing this the second time, it reminds me of like a really very concrete example. We did work in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and so like equity would be that the levees are at the level based on the flood possibilities of your neighborhood. The reality was that levees were built depending on the economic power of your neighborhood. So, and actually the New York Times did a big study about that, and when they studied like how adequate different levees were based on, and it was completely determined by economics and not by historical flood levels, which strikes me as being kind of a really concrete example of this, and something that matters more than whether or not you can see the baseball game.
Right.
So there are neighborhoods that were destroyed and people who died because the levees weren't built to flood levels, but built to economic levels. So
that's an incredible example. That's a very, I wish I could just say it's a metaphor, but it's a reality, sadly. That is an amazing example of what we're talking about here. And when the fence is a levee,
right.
It can break and flood and kill and, destroy neighborhoods.
Right.
Oh my gosh, it's maddening. So in this, we'll see, a third frame called liberation, where the fence is gone.
Right.
The fence is gone and the folks get to sit the game and they're having a blast. So there's also this kind of track race idea. So this is a tough one. I know CEOs of organizations that I train and work with who have a really, really hard time with equity. Because sometimes it feels unfair to the privileged person in a situation, but that's part of our work, and I think that's that feeling of unfairness where, well, wait, why doesn't everybody get the same thing? Well, is that really fair given the context of structural and systemic racism and oppression? Again, deeply contextual work, but just something to be aware of, something that's very much alive in the conversation where equality is not necessarily the goal. So
I did a bit of an internet search for definitions of equality and equity without getting too much satisfaction of that the dictionary definitions I found confuse them, it seemed to me. One of the other things that prompted me to do is to say it would be interesting to, if you will, make a list of the major factors that affect a person's well-being, success in life, whatever, however you want to define it. And notice that there are factors of background, environment, race, et cetera, et cetera.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, good. Thank you for that. So what we have are practices that can help matters. And the practices are a mix of internal and external work. The internal work is, doing that dialysis work of acknowledging and owning and releasing racism when we find it internally. And other kinds of isms that we might find that we have in us as well. Do some in-training, some in-person training. Put your body in the training space, because it can be a really different experience. Being in community, really very much encourage everyone to do this work in community as much as possible. But putting our bodies in the training space and bringing our bodies with us in this work is really important. Studying the contemplative and practicing non-attachment to outcome. People of color aren't projects. We're not here to make them better or to help them or teach them about racism. We might come alongside with them, and have our own liberation be tied to their liberation. But we need to be able to do this work with a non-attachment to outcome. Leaning into discomfort, like we talked about before, standing right outside of your comfort zone, surfing the edge between discomfort and comfort. And then space monitoring. Observe the amount of space that we have it in groups. How long do we feel empowered to speak when we're asked to speak or encouraged to speak? Do we take up a lot of space or just a little? There's ways to think about that, like step up, step back is one model. We're going to step up, do our thing, bring it, say our piece, but then step back so that someone else can then step up. We talk about cookies, like imagine there's a huge pile of cookies in the room, and every time someone speaks, they get a cookie. Do we end up with more cookies than others? Because we speak more? And isn't the goal for everyone to have equal, or equitable amounts of cookies? And then another tool in the same vein that I really love, it's kind of my very favorite one, is called Why Am I Talking? And it's WAIT, W-A-I-T, Why Am I Talking? And this is a little bit of a contemplative exercise to actually discern in the moment, what is my motivation in speaking right now? Does the thing that I need to say really need to be said? Maybe it isn't being said in the room, and so I do need to say it. Maybe it would be helpful to the group. Or am I talking, am I talking to be acknowledged? Am I talking to feel smart? Am I talking to impress someone? Am I talking just because I feel empowered to talk, right? So really, and that brings us to the next one, the inner witness, really developing the inner tools of self-observation to kind of really create the sense of an inner witness that watches the thoughts come and go in our being, and the feelings come and go in our being. And it's that inner witness that can tell us why we're talking. Or is this a kairos moment where I really need to speak? Or is this a moment that I can actually sit back and trust that it'll get said by someone else, you know? So really developing that inner witness to watch and observe and see a thread of the poison coming through, wrapped around a thought or a feeling. Being able to name white fragility. Oh, the inner witness is noticing that my body feels like it was just punched in the gut, you know? So being able to observe and have an inner awareness of our responses to things in regards to power and privilege and all this stuff we're talking about. So, and then of course you have your external work, right? We've got to work for justice, you know, support the work of the Exodus Foundation in Charlotte, who's doing amazing things to end the school to prison pipeline and to replace and dismantle mass incarceration. You know, take on some work, support the work, go out of your comfort zone, take your body into, you know, physically put yourself in spaces that support racial equality. Keep an eye out for bridge people who come from people groups that aren't like you, who are just kind of as curious about you as you or them. That's when you're going to know this is a bridge person. There are people in every community that's interested in the intersections and the periphery of their community, how their community intersects with other communities. And if you kind of hang out on the edge of your community and are willing to kind of shake hands and say hello and make eye contact, maybe feel a little uncomfortable in the process, you'll find the bridge people. And transformation is very much rooted in the relationships between bridge people. And so look for those folks. And defer to the leadership of people of color. There's times where we could make the decision, or we could actually defer to perhaps the people of color that we're working with. Our churches are working together. Maybe we don't make the calls on all the decisions. Maybe we defer. Maybe if we disagree, maybe we actually trust outside of our own experience and defer to the leadership of the people of color we're working with. And naming power, acknowledging privilege is one of the most important practices that we can do, because we're not used to naming our power. Our power is just kind of inherently wired, you know, and a lot of us don't really think of the ways that we have power. It can be fairly invisible. Remember our invisible knapsack article that we read. We often don't even think or acknowledge our power. But when we can acknowledge our privilege, we can actually name the powers that we hold, then we can just be honest and real about that. And then utilize that power and utilize that privilege to be an accomplice in relationships of accountability with people of color. So let us not be afraid to name our power and to name our privilege, but to do that in the context of being willing to defer to the leadership of people of color. So I wanted to give you guys a couple of resources. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And we are going to look at a piece called Culture Shift. So this was put out by the Catalyst Project, who we love. Chris Crass is one of the founders of the Catalyst Project. He's a Unitarian Universalist who does some amazing work, really helping groups of, white people think about how and act, in as accomplices in racial justice. So a couple shifts, and this is great for organizational culture, to shift from a call out culture, which is shaming people for making mistakes, focusing on regulating each other's language. I don't know if you've ever been around people who are like, ugh, they just don't get it. They just don't get it. We're just not going to deal with them. Just let them go, But shifting towards a build-up culture of appreciating and lifting up principled action and leadership where we see it, and offering constructive feedback to strengthen anti-racist practice. And we're going to talk a little bit more when we talk about surge organizing. They talk about calling out versus calling in, where we're calling people in to actually walk together in the work and support each other in the work, in imperfection. It's not going to be perfect, and we're going to help each other get better. So this other sense of critiquing from the sidelines, critiquing organizations or parts of the movement that we aren't a part of working with, and leading from the center. If we're going to be critical, we need to lead. We need to create the alternative, and recognizing that we've all internalized oppressive ideas, and we want to engage people in organizations and to make necessary changes. So not just critiquing from the sidelines, but actually getting involved, risking it getting messy, to be like, hey, what if we did it like this? What if we asked some people of color to be involved in the ground floor of this project instead of bringing them in at last minute to diversify our event, So really leading from the center and being willing to risk and to get messy and to get in there and be involved and doing it different. Deficit-based thinking is this constant focus on identifying weaknesses and pointing out what's lacking. So shifting that to asset-based thinking, we're building on strengths and we're nurturing what's working. We have a really strong focus of individuality in this country. One person can make a difference. Well, actually, no, it's actually usually not one person that does it. It's actually collective action of many people who come together and build people power in order to shift something. So finding ways to work collectively to multiply our impact. And then, this obsession with productivity is very much a white supremacist idea and a classist idea that people are, when people were owned, they were assets. And so people needed to be kept productive, right, at all times. And so this sense of productivity and this obsession with productivity has its roots in white supremacy. Class oppression. So the shift would be valuing whole people and varied participation in building liberatory movements. Like, for instance, there's a mom, she's really awesome. She's a great part of our group. She gets a lot done, but she's a mom. So she's not going to be able to be at every meeting. And she might have her kids with her sometimes. She may be distracted on the phone sometimes or during meetings because she's a mom, and we need to embrace that and embrace her as not just a productive part of this group, but a beautiful mother who's a part in this work, right? So anyway, this is just kind of a helpful, you can pull this down as a PDF, and this is just kind of a helpful thing to take to work, and to help kind of build cultures of organizing. Here's another good resource from the Catalyst Project. These are, let's see, I think there's 20 tools. And these are split up. I'm going to let you look at these on your own, but the first 7 are about developing an analysis. So it is important to do this cognitive work, right? We need to know our history. That's why we always do a history lesson. We need to develop our analysis. We need to study social movements led by people of color, past and present. We need to learn about the struggles of people of color where we live. We need to study anti-racist history. We need to study women of color and women of color feminism, particularly, and learn about the intersections of oppression and privilege, right? So all of that is a kind of cognitive function. And then we have to bring it down, and we have to embody the work. It's not just a head process. It's an embodied work. So all of these points here is just join an existing organization, find other people to work and talk with, find ways to support people of color, challenge, oppressive behavior in yourself and others, find a mentor, develop your skills, do this work, become someone who is working actively. And then the rest, the other 5 are about building movements. So this is the collective action piece of how we achieve more than the sum of our parts when we work in chorus, right? So the currency of transformation is relationships. So build relationships with the people you're working with. It's great to be able to care about and love the people that you're working with. Build relationships of trust and accountability with communities of color and communities that are struggling for racial justice. This is something we'll talk more about when we talk about surge practices, but there's this idea that we need to be in relationships with people of color and be accountable to them, because as white people, we don't inherently know how to dismantle racism. This is something that we need to clearly learn about and have relationships with people of color along the way who can give us feedback. And bridge people can be amazing support to us in figuring out how to actually be helpful, and just, know that your liberation is tied to the liberation of all. While people with privilege are often less effective, find your self-interest in that work. So what is your own self-interest? Don't just do it because, those poor people, we need to help them. No. How are you liberated by the liberation of those that you seek to liberate, right? That is more equitable than kind of just going into as kind of the savior or the missionary to kind of save a group of people, right? And then I really love 20 is that we are in this together and we are not alone. And it's really important to do this work in community. So, all right. So I think we'll just talk for maybe another 10 minutes or so and maybe wrap up a little bit early. I wanted to tell you about showing up for racial justice. And it's a little bit of a case study on a national organization that has chapters over, I think, 100 chapters all over the country that are all volunteer activists who are primarily white people working in accountability relationships with people of color for racial justice. So have either one of you heard about Surge so far?
Yes.
Ladine, you have? Okay, great. Well, I work with Surge Faith, and I also work locally here in Asheville with a group. I've been a part of our local Surge group and I've been on the leadership team for the past little more than a year. So, they have a big vision, a society where we struggle together with love for justice, human dignity, and a sustainable world. There's this great quote here from Alicia Garza. We need you defecting from white supremacy and changing the narrative of white supremacy by breaking white silence. I find that term white silence is really powerful. If we think about the generations of white people who stood aside for centuries while Black people and people of color were brutalized violently, to be able to be one of the people breaking that silence is it's a powerful thing. It's an amazing right and privilege to be able to do that. really, if we look at that in the context of the history, right, of white silence. It's pretty stunning, pretty amazing. And this idea of defecting from white supremacy is fascinating to me. Like it's a thing you could actually defect from. Kind of makes it kind of feel kind of palpable, right? Like, wow, I could leave it. So one of their values is calling people in, not calling out. Does everyone know who Anne Braden is? Anne Braden was a white anti-racist activist who worked in the South with Miles Horton and others who were doing early integrated organizing early on in the civil rights movement, and desegregated or integrated one of the first neighborhoods in the South to be integrated. She says the battle is and always has been a battle for the hearts and minds of white people in this country. The fight against racism is our issue. It's not something that we're called on to help people of color with. We need to become involved with it as if our lives depend on it, because really, in truth, they do. I just love that quote. I think it's amazing. Another one of their values, and these values are also practices. Each one of these values you can put into absolute action. So this one is take risks, make mistakes, learn, and keep going. Black Lives Matter activist Maurice Mitchell said this amazing thing that I love his picture of. He said, your individual anxiety about possibly getting things wrong has nothing to do with my liberation. Just pointing out how often we get caught up in our own anxiety of wanting to say things right or make the right choice or do it perfectly. And that really, when we look at it, that anxiety is so much less than the risks that people of color are taking every day, right?
I just happened to come across two different studies like late last year in which like the majority of white people choose not to have conversations about race or with people of color. Like they actively choose not to have conversations at all because they're afraid of saying something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that's so interesting. Like that our decision would be, okay, like rather than not say anything wrong. So I won't say anything wrong. I'm just not going to talk to any Black people ever again. I mean, it's kind of, but it ties into that whole idea of like, if I say it wrong, there's no way back.
Right. Absolutely. So that, taking risks and making mistakes and keep going is really critical, right? It's kind of the antidote to that. Mm-hmm. And I cannot tell you how many times my surge group is just sitting in total fear. It's like, what's going to happen next? And we just kind of keep saying, okay, we got to take this risk. We might screw it up, but we're going to learn from it. We're going to keep going. It's going to be okay, And we have one woman of color who's in our surge group here in Asheville, and she's constantly going, y'all are afraid. It's okay. Don't be afraid. It's going to be okay. Which is really great. I just really appreciate her for that. So tapping into mutual interest. So I talked about this a little bit before, just literally tapping into what is our own self-interest. And doing this work. And, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. quote here, it really boils down to this, that all life is interrelated, that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied into a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And he said that, what was that quote? Oppression anywhere is a threat to...
a threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So, and if, we want to learn more about that in Christianity, we have multiple rich traditions of liberation theology, right? We've got queer theology. We've got theology that comes from feminists. We've got theology that comes from South America. We have an indigenous theology that's from Black sharecroppers right here in North Carolina, that Herzog wrote a lot about in his theological work, and that's what's happening right here in North Carolina. So we can really look to liberation theology to have a theological basis for mutual interest, and that can be really a really amazing conversation with Christians. Accountability through collective action. So it's this idea that we need to maintain ongoing relationships individually, but also organizationally with leaders and organizations led by people of color. And that we know it is our work to organize other white people, and that we're committed to moving more white people for collective action, but we can't build the world alone. We can't rebuild it. We need, we must do it in chorus with people of color. And centering their leadership. We have to, Jesus is with the most oppressed, right? So we need to center the most oppressed, and be right there in the trenches with them. Let's see, this is a really good quote from Ricardo Levins Morales. One more thing, you may not get the validation you hunger for. Stepping outside of the smoke and mirrors of racial privilege is hard, but so is living within the electrified fences of racial oppression. And no one gets cookies for that. The thing is that when you help put out a fire, the people whose home was in flames may be too upset to thank and praise you, especially when you look a lot like the folks who set the fire. That's okay. This is about something so much bigger than that. These are things in life we don't get to do right, but we get to do them. And I think this speaks really beautifully, actually, because sometimes the most marginalized people are really hurt and really angry, and aren't really happy to be like, thank you so much for, wanting to be your friend, but we do the work anyway, right? This is why we practice non-attachment to outcome. We don't just do this work until a person of color is mean to us, treats us unfairly. No. It's not. We're not defining our success by just that interpersonal interaction, right? We're doing this work because it's so much bigger than you or that person or anyone else, and that this is our work to do. Another great surge value is enough for everyone. And it talks about dominant white culture teaching us to feel isolated and scarce in everything we do. And, there are very systemic and structural barriers to resources, where resources are structurally contained, right? So that they're not, we talked about the 4 kinds of racism in our first class. And we talked about like redlining, and how literally neighborhoods realtors were told, don't sell this neighborhood. Don't let any Black people into this neighborhood. Resources are structurally contained. We have schools that don't get access to the state funding that they should because they're in a depressed economic neighborhood or a Black neighborhood. So we need to believe that there is enough for everyone. And that part of our role as white people is to use our privilege to tear down these boundaries to equity, and to raise resources to support people of color-led efforts. So there's that great Marianne Williamson quote that everyone's seen, I'm sure. And then the last one is called Growth is Good. And a lot of times, and particularly right now, I see a lot of new people joining the conversation and joining our movements because they're scared and they're mad at what Trump is doing in his administration. And I also see a lot of longtime organizers getting mad that these new people who are showing up aren't doing it right. And I kind of think that when everyday people, ordinary folks, are moved to become politically active, that we should be excited about that growth. And because if we don't bring in new people, our work doesn't grow, right? And if our work doesn't grow, we can't bring the numbers of white people needed to undermine white supremacy and join people of color-led efforts, right? And then Ann Braden again said that We have to stop believing that we are the only special ones who can be part of the work for racial justice. We must grow our groups and our movement, understanding that welcoming people in, even at the risk of it being messy, is deeply part of what we're being called to do. So let's welcome the new folks in, and of course, train them. Let's train everyone, and train people to train people. But growth is good. So I wanted to share Surge with you as kind of a case study of ways that white people can be really engaged in collective action for racial justice. And it looks very different in every city because it's contextual to what the people of color there want. The Surge group in Charlotte has actually shut down because the people of color that were in relationship and advising the Surge group there said, we don't want you to have your own white people group. We want to train the white people as people of color. And so they dismantled their Surge group, shut down their Facebook page, and stopped it. And, that's great. Good for them. If that's what's working for them in that context, then that's fine. So that is all our material for today. I would encourage people to take a look at Surge and get involved in Surge work. And Surge has lots of amazing resources on their website, showingupforracialjustice.org. Lots of great training opportunities coming up. They're actually doing a national training at the Highlander Center this summer. That would be really good for folks to go to. And just love the work of Surge and happy to share it with you. So any thoughts or questions or comments about the content from today? All right, well, let's do our checkout. Let's go around and name a power that we hold. We're going to practice naming power as we check out. So I'll model it. I'm Holly. And a way that I hold power is that I have the ability to do some volunteer activism on the side. I can make an income, but then I have time and some agency and ability to do some volunteer activism. And that's the power that I hold that some other folks don't have. They have to work all the time, or they have big families. So I have that power. I'll try to use it for good, not evil. Who wants to name a power in their checkout?
Well, I can't. So I'm Ladane, and some of the power I have is involved with the organization that I work with, and that we have not a huge budget, but some money. So money that we can direct in particular ways, and I can help be a part of that, of getting into the hands of people where it's going to make a difference.
Awesome, thank you. What about you, Arliss? Can you name a power that you hold?
Well, I have some power in the terms of available time and some available money. It's just awful hard to figure out where to put it.
I hear that. Well, good. Thank you. Yes, time and money are valuable resources to the movement. So wonderful. Maybe we can help you brainstorm where to invest some of that time and money. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Really loved having you guys with me tonight for this. Thanks for showing up. Appreciate you for that. And we will hopefully see you both tomorrow night on our class 3, our final class together.
Thanks, Holly.
All right. Thanks, Ladane. Have a good night.
Thanks. Good night, Arliss.
Good night. I take it that there was no online discussions during the week. At least I haven't.
Yeah, I haven't really, I don't think I've encouraged the online discussions enough. We haven't had much. We just had a couple in the first class. So it's not been a huge part of our experience in this class so far. But feel free to post there. I mean, if you have thoughts, if you have resources, ideas, do feel free to post there. People will see it, and I do monitor that as well. So.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, y'all. Have a great night.
Night.
Good night.
Bye.